Sheina v'libi v'libi kol dodi dofek pitri li ani Sheina v'libi v'libi kol dodi dofek pitri li. When I was about 8 years old, I remember going to the school nurse because of a painful headache. And I tried to explain to her that this wasn't like other headaches I had had before. This one felt concentrated right in the middle of my forehead. And it wasn't just painful, it also seemed to interrupt my ability to think. But my 8-year-old self couldn't quite describe those nuances. I just kept insisting that this was a different headache. And the skeptical school nurse, she chastised me for faking it. There were no such things as different headaches, she informed me. I would need to come up with a better excuse if I wanted to successfully skip class. I was bewildered, but I didn't know what else to do except leave her office and return to class in pain. And of course, I didn't know that I was experiencing one of my first migraines. I didn't know that those migraines would go undiagnosed for years in spite of increasing intensity and frequency and disruption to my life. I didn't realize that one person in a position of authority could have such a startling impact on me simply because she didn't listen to me. Somehow her quick, inaccurate assessment of my lived experience overpowered my own judgment and reverberated through my life for decades. And even after my migraines were diagnosed, I downplayed the effects of my suffering. I laughed off the times when they became so painful. I would pass out at school, at work, at the mall, on the subway, because ultimately, the power of that school nurse not listening to me, the shame I felt that a supposedly imaginary, invisible illness could cripple me, it overwhelmed what I knew to be true. And I'm not alone. And this is by far not the only example of this kind of unsettling dissonance, this alarming chasm between reality and the recognition of reality, particularly for women. For almost 20 years, experts have acknowledged what has been termed the gender pain gap. Essentially, medical professionals are more likely to dismiss a female patient's report of pain. And this has not just led to increased suffering for women, it has also led to higher mortality rates. And so much of this could be mitigated if we did something that seems simple and obvious and yet not quite part of the cultural norm. We need to listen to women, really listen to women. And of course, this critical issue affects our lives far beyond the medical field. As a woman and a rabbi, I am keenly aware of how the absence of female voices has shaped Judaism for thousands of years, and how much work it will take to balance the scales so that women are truly integrated into Jewish consciousness, not as an afterthought or through tokenization, but authentically and inextricably a part of a fully realized religious approach. It is exhausting sometimes to be constantly vigilant in pointing out the negative effects of the patriarchal systems we inherited. And yet, I believe it is essential to the work that I do. I believe that we as Jews, that we are commanded to do it. And this isn't just a byproduct of some fringe feminist agenda. It is something that is as old and as sacred as the Torah itself, and it starts with listening. This week's Torah portion is called Chayei Sarah, the life of Sarah. Somewhat ironically, however, within the first 2 verses, we are told that Sarah has died, and the rest of the Torah portion isn't really about Sarah at all. But tonight, I want to focus on a key moment in her life story and the legacy we, as her descendants, have inherited. When Sarah couldn't conceive a child, she instructed Abraham, her husband, to produce an heir with her handmaiden Hagar. But the birth of Abraham and Hagar's son Ishmael only made things harder for the family. Shocking, I know. This was further complicated when Sarah did indeed become pregnant, and she gave birth to her own son Isaac. As they grew up, there was an incident between Ishmael and Isaac, and this causes Sarah to be concerned, and she demands that Abraham send Ishmael and Hagar away. We read, Sarah saw the son whom Hagar the Egyptian had borne to Abraham playing with Isaac. She said to Abraham, cast out that slave woman and her son, for the son of that slave shall not share in the inheritance with my son Isaac. The matter distressed Abraham greatly, for it concerned a son of his. But God said to Abraham, do not be distressed over the boy or your slave. Whatever Sarah tells you, Shema b'kolah, listen to her voice, for it is through Isaac that offspring shall be continued for you. God tells Abraham to Shema, listen, b'kolah, to her voice. Rashi, the most famous medieval commentator on the Torah, tells us that from this, quote, we learn that Abraham was a lesser prophet than Sarah. For those of you who are not regularly steeped in reading rabbinic commentary, of which there might be a few, you might not realize just how radical this statement is. And unlike many other sections, Rashi does nothing more to elaborate on this. He doesn't try to explain away or diminish Sarah's authority. He augments it. How is it that Rashi sees Sarah as being more prophetic than Abraham? Abraham, who received the call to leave his home and journey to the land that God would show him. Abraham, who has multiple direct recorded conversations with God. Abraham, who is credited as the original monotheist. Given just this short list of accomplishments, how is it that Sarah could possibly surpass her husband in prophecy? But let's consider this further. Let's shema, let's listen more intently to the text. It isn't really through Abraham that the crucial lineage we descend from is generated. Abraham already had a child. And after Sarah's death, he goes on to have several more. But Sarah, she only has one child. She sends Ishmael away, not necessarily as it's commonly interpreted because she's jealous of Hagar or protective of Isaac. The verses tell us she is sending them away because it is critical that the line of inheritance stems from her child, because that is what God wanted. And Abraham doesn't want to recognize that truth. It takes a commandment from God to instruct Abraham that he must listen to Sarah's voice. And what if we lifted God's commandment, Shema b'kolah, listen to her voice, out of this particular episode, as is so often done in other instances when people quote from the Bible? What if we repeated it as a healing mantra, a directive, a commitment, a promise? What if we saw this commandment as essential to listen to women's voices as essential to Judaism as the Shema we just said together, declaring our commitment to one God? Would that lead us to a reality in which women weren't merely permitted to speak, but a world where women were actually, really, truly listened to? The song I began with is a quote from the book of Song of Songs. Ani yeshena, I am asleep, the libi air, but my heart is awake. Kol dodi dofek, the voice of my beloved is knocking. Pitri li, open up to me. It continues on. Achoti, rayati, yonati, tamati, my sister, my lover, my dove, my perfect one. Sheroshi nimlatal kvutzotai resise laila, for my head is filled with morning dew, and my hair with drops of night. The voices of women are knocking, and we have all been asleep. But now there is a part of us that is woke, and it is time to rise and open the doors to the wisdom of beloved prophetesses we haven't even yet come to know. And that is how we can honor the life of our mother, Sarah. Shabbat Shalom.